I am Ukrainian. Actually, I'm a Ukrainian Jew. My mother was born in the Ukrainian city of Kovel. She lived there till she was a teenager. But in the 1930s, Hitler and the Nazis had come to power in Germany, and they were threatening to murder all the Jews of Europe. My grandmother was really scared. She wanted to get her family out of Kovel, out of Ukraine, and bring them to America. The problem was that in America, there were almost as many people who hated Jews as there were Nazis who hated Jews, and Jews just couldn't get into the United States. So my grandmother concocted a plan. She was a widow. Her father had come to America 10 years earlier. That's my great-grandfather. And my grandmother's plan was to get her family onto a ship, bring them to Ellis Island in New York, and claim that her father was her husband. The problem with that was that her youngest son, Abraham, was only 6 years old at the time. In those days, poor people didn't just get on ships and sail across the Atlantic Ocean for conjugal visits. So there was no way that that guy could be the father of her 6-year-old son. She didn't want to blow the story for her whole family. So she left Abraham in Kovel, Ukraine, with relatives, and as soon as the family got settled, she would bring him over. So the family crossed the ocean, came to Ellis Island, my mother being one of them, and they didn't fool the immigration people at all. They were going to deport them back to Ukraine. Had my mother been deported back to Ukraine, I could have been a movie star. I could have been one of the little toddlers running around the concentration camp in the movie Schindler's List. But the family was able to stay. Otherwise, I wouldn't be speaking with you right now. Things didn't go quite as well for my uncle Abraham. World War II began, and my grandmother couldn't bring him over. In 1942, the Nazis marched into Kovel and shot 18,000 Jews, including my uncle Abraham, who was 12 years old at the time, and threw them all into a mass grave. After that, the Nazis got smart. They decided, why are we wasting so many bullets? So they just started putting people in gas chambers. Here is the kicker to this talk, though. Helping the Nazis murder all these Jews, including my uncle Abraham, were Ukrainian Nazi fascists, collaborators. Only a small percentage of Ukrainians, but they helped the Nazis murder my uncle and all the other Jews. They were led by a guy named Stefan Bandera. Fast forward to today. And in the Ukrainian military fighting this war with Russia, there are the grandsons of those Ukrainian fascists who worship Stefan Bandera, are now a major part of the Ukrainian military. They're called the Azov Brigade. They hold up banners with Stefan Bandera's picture. They have Nazi insignia on their uniforms. People will say, well, Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, is Jewish. Well, actually, the Azov Battalion Nazis are not murdering Jews these days. They still hate us, but they're not killing Jews, not killing Zelensky. Instead, they are killing Russian Ukrainians. Over the past 8 years, the Azov Brigade and Ukrainian military have murdered about 14,000 Russian Ukrainians in the Donbas region. The geopolitical analyst Noam Chomsky, in his famous book, Manufacturing Consent, distinguishes between worthy victims and unworthy victims. Worthy victims are the victims of our so-called enemies, such as Russia. The Russians have killed in this war so far about 5,000 civilians, and they are worthy victims. They're the victims of our enemies. There is getting endless publicity for these worthy victims, and they are victims. Unworthy victims are the victims of us, of the United States, which arms and trained, helped arm and train the Azov Brigade and the Ukrainian military, who have killed those 14,000 Russian Ukrainians. Because there are victims, they are unworthy victims and get almost no publicity. At the same time, in the country of Yemen, also unworthy victims of our staunch ally, Saudi Arabia, the head-chopping totalitarian dictatorship monarchy, for the last 5 years have slaughtered about 500,000 Yemenis. They are unworthy victims because the United States is an ally and backs and supports and helps and arms the Saudis. They are unworthy victims, get almost no publicity. They are also unworthy victims because the Ukrainians are actually blonde-haired and blue-eyed. They look like us. They are, quote, civilized, whereas the Yemenis are darker-skinned people, and our mainstream media calls them uncivilized. That also makes them unworthy victims who get almost no publicity in our mainstream media. So we have 500 worthy victims, Ukrainians. Maybe there's more. It's questionable how many people have actually died there. 500 worthy victims who get endless publicity. 500,000 unworthy victims in Yemen. And 14,000 unworthy victims, Russian Ukrainians. Worthy victims and unworthy victims.